Hello, my name is Mark Tropea. I'm the executive chef here at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. We're here with our friends from Kids Alley in our restaurant Stir, and we're preparing some recipes. And the next recipe that I want to show is a Snickerdoodle cookie, which is a simple sugar cookie that's dipped in cinnamon sugar and then baked. Really simple process. Cookies are, if you're new to baking, are a really simple thing to get into. You just need to understand the process a little bit. So the thing for a successful cookie is following the steps. Obviously measuring your ingredients properly, but following the steps. So the first step is to do a step called creaming with the butter and the sugar. So what that does is we're gonna take butter and granulated sugar, we're gonna place them in the mixer with a paddle, and we're gonna mix it for a few minutes until it becomes light and fluffy. And what this does is it incorporates the sugar evenly into the butter. It hydrates the sugar, so you're not biting into lumps of sugar when you eat the cookie. And then it also creates a base to incorporate our dry ingredients. These are the ingredients that we'll be using to make this cookie. So we have butter, granulated sugar, all-purpose flour, cream of tartar, baking soda, salt, vanilla extract, whole eggs, and cinnamon sugar mix. With the eggs, we're using large eggs. If you're gonna use extra large eggs or something else, you would need to adjust the recipe. I recommend using large eggs. So to start, we're gonna cream the sugar and the butter together in our stand mixer. So I'll set the mixer with a paddle attachment. And then we're gonna turn this on. Oh, the butter is room temperature. That's another important part. And this will help paddle easily and incorporate the sugar. We're going to add our sugar gradually. All right, so our sugar and the butter are in the mixer. We're paddling it, which is, again, creaming it. This is gonna go for a few minutes until it's light and fluffy, maybe 4 or 5 minutes. An important thing to do in this process is scrape the bowl. So I'm gonna turn the mixer off, and then I'm going to grab my rubber spatula, and I'm gonna scrape the sides of the bowl. And what this will do is release any of the butter and sugar that may be stuck in the bottom and the sides and prevent us from getting an even mixture. You're gonna wanna do this once or twice through the process of creaming. Once you're doing this, you can turn the speed all the way up. The more rotations you get from the mixer, the faster this project goes. All right, so we scraped the bowl twice. I'm gonna mix it for 1 more minute before we start adding our eggs. So the next 2 ingredients to go in will be our eggs and our vanilla extract. At this stage, you can mix them together and just add them in. On low speed to start, because you don't want the eggs to splash up out of the bowl. And then once the eggs are incorporated, you can turn the speed up to high and then scrape the bowl down again just to make sure it's an even, homogeneous mixture. right, so the butter and sugar have creamed together. We've added the eggs, and now that mixture, which are the wet ingredients, everything is light and fluffy and ready for the dry ingredients to be incorporated. So the dry ingredients, we have all-purpose flour, cream of tartar, baking soda, which is a leavening agent, but it also gives it some flavor. Then we have salt, and even though this is a sweet recipe, you do want to add some salt because salt will bring out the flavor of anything that you add it to, and it'll also provide balance. So you can add those in. You don't have to sift all the ingredients together. You can just kind of mix them loosely. And then I'm going to turn the speed to low, and I'm going to mix in the dry ingredients a little bit at a time until they're all mixed in. But the important thing is to not mix it for too long. So what happens is after you add the flour and the dough starts to come together, if you were to mix this for a long time, you'd end up with something that's very tough, and you want to avoid that. You want your cookies to be tender and crumbly. Inside the bowl, the mixture will look crumbly, and then as you gently mix it, eventually the flour will start to hydrate with the wet ingredients. It'll form a dough. It'll be a light, loose dough. Scrape the bowl. You want to make sure that all of the ingredients incorporate evenly. And turn the mixer on again. You can turn the speed up a little bit at this point, but again, be careful. You don't want to go too long, just until it comes together. So we have our dough. It's finished. It's a nice, smooth, homogeneous dough. We're gonna get everything down off the paddle. Make sure we don't leave anything in the bowl, because you're gonna wanna make as many cookies as you can. So scrape down the bowl. We'll bring it all into a nice tight ball. You can do this with your hands, you can do it with a spoon or a rubber spatula the same way I'm doing it. And then what you're gonna wanna do is turn it out onto some plastic wrap, and you're going to flatten it into a disc and wrap it up and then put it in the refrigerator for 20 minutes to a half an hour. And the reason you wanna do this is because you want the dough to relax. If you were to try to bake this immediately, two things would happen. One, you'd end up with a tougher cookie. And two, it would spread because the process of mixing creates a little bit of friction, and it warms up the dough, or warms up the butter, and it'll cause the cookie to spread. So it's important to let it rest for 20 to 30 minutes in the refrigerator before you bake. Just like that, cookie dough ready to be rested in the refrigerator. So here we have our rested dough. We're gonna take this, and I like to put it into a bowl, get ready for forming. How I like to form the cookies is, if you have one, use a small ice cream scoop, but if not, a spoon would work just as well. And I'll scoop portions of the dough so that they're all the same size. And I find that this will help each cookie be evenly sized and they all bake at the same time. So if you end up doing it with a spoon, fine, as long as the spoon, you fill it the same way and you make sure they're all even. This will make sure that when you bake them, you don't have cookies that are, some are cooked, some are not. We'll do this with all the dough. I'll take these balls and I'll roll them between my palms so that they're even. just like you're making a meatball. And then the next step would be to coat them in this cinnamon sugar mixture, which you have a recipe for, but it's basically 4 parts sugar to 1 part cinnamon. So you want to be generous with this. Make sure that the cookie is evenly coated. And what happens when you bake it is as it spreads, it'll get these little cracks and fissures in between the cinnamon sugar, and it looks really nice. We'll place it onto a prepared baking sheet, just lined with parchment paper. Again, a non-stick baking pan would work fine for this, and also a silicone mat. So the cookie goes on the baking sheet. Roll it, toss it, just make sure it's coated. We'll place it on the baking sheet. Now once it's on the sheet, you want to flatten it down just a little bit, and it'll help it cook evenly. So if you don't flatten it, you're gonna end up with this really high mounded cookie and the center doesn't cook so well. So flatten it down a little bit, and then it's ready to go in the oven. So the recipe calls for an oven that's set at 350 degrees. That's it's very good for a conventional oven. If you're using a convection oven, you may want to reduce the temperature to 325 just to account for the difference. These are ready for the oven. All right, so our cookies, they baked in the oven for about 9 to 11 minutes. Again, depending on your oven. But the thing that you're looking for is a nice even golden brown color and a little bit of cracking, like I said. And then once they look like this, they're ready to come out of the oven. And there's a couple important things. These are great to eat warm, but give them at least 10 minutes out of the oven for 2 reasons. 1, because the dough is still finishing cooking at that point. And 2, because they'll actually taste better when they're not piping hot out of the oven. You want to let them rest just a little bit, but these are great at room temperature. And after the cookies are made, they're good for a few days stored airtight. Snickerdoodle cookies.